bloodletting for a fever, swallowing mercury for a cough, being burned at the stake, all just another Tuesday in Europe 5 centuries ago. The everyday fixes and punishments of the 1500s were not just strange, they were lethal, and everyone thought they made sense. What allowed entire societies to treat suffering as routine? And how did so many survive a world where the cure could kill you faster than the disease? What is truly horrifying is how normal it all once seemed. The next case is worse than you would ever imagine. Doctors in the 1500s trusted a logic that feels closer to medieval alchemy than medicine. According to Galenic theory, every illness came from an imbalance in the body's 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The fix? Drain the bad fluids. Barber surgeons stood ready with lancets and leeches, opening veins for fevers or headaches, sometimes until patients fainted or worse. But nothing matched the horror of syphilis treatments after it swept through Europe. In 1530, Girolamo Fracastoro gave the disease its name and recommended the standard remedy: mercury. Mercury ointments were rubbed into the skin or vaporized in hot boxes, forcing patients to sweat and drool for hours. Doctors watched for one sign of success: profuse salivation. If your mouth poured like a faucet, they believed the poison was leaving your body. In reality, mercury burned flesh, rotted gums, and left minds clouded or broken. Survival rates for severe cases barely cleared 50%. Yet for centuries, educated experts insisted this was science, and families paid for the privilege of watching loved ones waste away, convinced they were buying a cure. Crowds pressed in for the spectacle. In the 1500s, punishment unfolded as public theatre, pain and death staged for all to see. The rack and the wheel stood ready in city squares, their creaks and groans drawing a mix of curiosity, fear, and approval. In England, the case of Anne Askew in 1546 shows how far authorities would go. Accused of heresy, she was stretched on the rack until her joints tore, then carried, barely alive, to Smithfield. There, officials chained her to the stake and denied her the chance to recant. Eyewitness broadsheets described the crowd's reaction as the flames took hold. When gunpowder meant for a quick end failed to ignite, wood was withheld to prolong her agony. Askew sang psalms as smoke billowed, her voice rising over jeers and shouts. Such executions weren't just punishment, they were lessons, reminders that defiance could mean a slow, public death. The logic was simple: terrorize the many by destroying the few. Venice in the late 1500s faced a threat that defied explanation. Plague returned again and again, sweeping through narrow canals and crowded markets. With no knowledge of germs, city officials still noticed a pattern. Disease followed travelers and cargo. In 1576, as the death toll mounted, tens of thousands were lost in a single year, and the Venetian Republic enforced a radical solution. Ships and people arriving from infected ports were sent to isolated islands called lazarettos. There, the law demanded 40 days of isolation, a quarantina, before anyone could step foot in the city. Health magistrates, backed by emergency statutes, wielded sweeping powers to detain, inspect, and even destroy goods. Merchant guilds, desperate to keep trade flowing, lobbied for early releases or slipped bribes to officials. Tensions ran high as the economy sputtered, and rumors spread of secret deals. Mortality records from 1576 show the cost. Nearly 1 in 3 Venetians perished, yet the city's strict quarantine rules became a model for public health across Europe. The logic was simple: contain the sick, protect the many, even if no one could see the enemy they were fighting. But this was only the beginning. Wait until you see what the 1600s will bring. In Renaissance Europe, the pursuit of beauty sent people straight to the apothecary's door, and sometimes to an early grave. The hottest trend among the elite was a ghostly white face, the kind you see in portraits of Elizabeth I and Venetian nobility. Achieving that look meant slathering on Venetian ceruse, a creamy cosmetic made by mixing powdered lead with vinegar. Recipe books from the era spelled it out. Melt the lead, soak it, grind it, and apply daily. The result was a flawless pallor that screamed wealth. But the side effects did not stay secret for long. Hairlines receded, eyebrows vanished, and skin peeled in sheets. Over time, users suffered from infertility, tremors, and even madness. Some physicians raised alarms, warning that lead would rot the flesh and poison the blood, but their voices were drowned out by a booming trade. Apothecaries, eager to please their wealthy clients, kept the recipes flowing and the risks hidden. The more the symptoms spread, the more demand grew. Pale skin remained the ultimate status symbol, no matter the cost. In the end, vanity was not just skin deep, it seeped into the bones, leaving a legacy of quiet suffering behind painted faces. In the wake of conquest, the Spanish crown carved up the Americas with a system called encomienda. On paper, it was a promise to protect and Christianize indigenous people. But in practice, it was a license for forced labor. Hernan Cortes described in his letters how he parceled out entire towns to his captains, boasting of tens of thousands under his control. Tribute quotas, once owed to Aztec rulers, doubled or tripled under Spanish lords. In Tlaxcala and the Valley of Mexico, villages that once sent maize or cotton now faced impossible demands, enforced with violence. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar, traveled the colonies and documented what he saw. Men worked to death in fields and mines. Women and children were pressed into servitude. Whole communities vanished. He wrote of regions where, from 1.5 million people, only a handful survived. The numbers are staggering. By 1600, central Mexico's population had collapsed from 25 million to barely 1 million. Epidemics swept through weakened bodies, but overwork and brutality finished the job. Spanish records tracked the loss, but the suffering is clearest in indigenous accounts. Villages emptied, fields were abandoned, elders recalled the dead outnumbering the living. High on the steps of Tenochtitlan's great temple, priests moved with practiced calm. Their white robes, stiff with dried blood, signaled a role both sacred and terrifying. Every year, as the ritual calendar turned, thousands of captives were led up the pyramid. The Florentine Codex, compiled from the words of Nahua informants, describes the scene. Hearts were cut free with obsidian blades and lifted skyward as an offering to the sun. The logic behind this was not cruelty for its own sake. In the Aztec worldview, the universe ran on reciprocity. Humans owed a debt to the gods, paid in blood, to keep the sun rising and rain falling. Without these sacrifices, priests warned, the world would fall into darkness. Codex Mendoza lists festival after festival, each with its own quota. Some years, the tally reached 20,000 hearts, though modern scholars debate the numbers. Archaeological finds at the Templo Mayor reveal towers built of human skulls, evidence that these rituals were no legend. For the priesthood, each offering was a bargain with the cosmos, a necessary act to sustain life itself. Yet for those outside this faith, the practice remains almost impossible to comprehend. Giving birth in the 1500s was a private ordeal laced with fear. Each labor brought a gamble. Parish records show that for every 100 births, 1 or 2 mothers died, and up to 1/3 of infants never saw their first birthday. Midwives, armed with bundles of herbs and simple iron tools, stood as the only defense against infection or bleeding. Burial registers from London and rural parishes fill with the names of women lost in childbed, sometimes alongside their newborns. Families turned to wet nurses for survival, or handed orphaned infants to foundling homes. In a world without antiseptics or pain relief, every birth carried the shadow of a grave, and every cradle a question mark. In the summer of 1518, Strasbourg's council found itself facing a crisis that defied explanation. Dozens of townspeople had taken to the streets, unable to stop dancing. The city registers from August record desperate measures. First, officials built a stage and hired pipers, hoping music would drive the mania out. When that failed, and as the numbers swelled to hundreds, panic set in. Council minutes banned all music and public dancing under threat of heavy fines, blaming the outbreak on a curse or demonic possession. Reports soon spread of people collapsing from exhaustion, with later chronicles claiming at least 15 deaths. Physicians argued over causes. Some blamed poisonous rye. Others saw mass hysteria, fueled by hunger and fear. The records show a city council outmatched by a wave of communal anxiety that turned invisible dread into a public spectacle of suffering. In Ming China, girls of elite families faced foot binding as early as age 5. Mothers followed household manuals, winding cloth tight to shape the coveted 3-inch lotus foot. Infection and lifelong pain were common, but status depended on the ritual. By the late 1500s, nearly half of upper-class women lived with bound feet. Some, like the scholar Chen Shui, wrote fierce letters condemning the practice as needless suffering, yet their warnings vanished under layers of silk and tradition. What once seemed ordinary now shocks us, but today's norms may be tomorrow's horrors. The line between progress and cruelty keeps shifting, often without warning. History isn't just behind us, it's shaping how we judge right and wrong now. Ready to see how the 1600s rewrote the rules?